Good evening, witches and warlocks out there. How y'all doing tonight? Welcome to tonight's episode of Cinema Lab. I am joined here with some of my favorite film folks, even coming so far as from Florida. What's up? So as you may know, we are going to be talking about the 2015 Robert Eggers film, The Witch. So just a heads up, because this is a film discussion and it's kind of a book club style, we are very likely going to be spoiling a lot of the movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, you're going to want to hop off and go watch that first. I know for sure it's streaming on Kanopy. That's Kanopy with a K. And you can access that platform for free with your Grand Rapids Public Library card. And I know a lot of other libraries take part in that service too. So if you're not from Grand Rapids, go check it out. But without further ado, I would like to introduce the rest of my panel, and we will go to Caleb first. What's up, Caleb?
Hi, I am Caleb Dillon. I'm the front of house manager at Wealthy Theater, and I am very scared of the woods about 70% of the time.
I feel like it's a semi-healthy fear, you know, the dark woods at least, like being alone in the dark woods. Mm-hmm. Good, wonderful. Hayes, how's it going?
It's going great. Hey out there, folks. My name is Hayes Griffin. I'm a musician and music teacher, former station manager at WYCE, one of the departments of the CMC, which is why I love all of these people, and I'm here right now. And I love Swedish folk instruments. I just want to say that. So, yeah, we're going to get into that tonight.
What an obscure love. I love that. And then last but not least, coming live from Florida, it's Virginia. How you doing?
I'm well. I am snowless. It's not cold here, so as I said earlier, suck it. But I'm the co-founder of Screen Club, that is also a program of Cinema Lab, and I actually love the woods. I grew up in Florida, so I feel safe in the woods. Conversely, I feel very afraid of abductions in open fields. So we're all just really rounding out the panel here with different opinions, but just for white people. So I'm loving the diversity.
Great, wonderful. Glad you called it out. So as I mentioned before, this is a book club style discussion. This is just the same as Screen Club, which that's specifically for TV. Cinema Lab focuses on movies. So we do want to encourage anybody who is watching while we are live tonight to comment below. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can post your comment there. It'll pop up here, and if we can fit it into the conversation, we will. Otherwise, this is also going to be rebroadcasting on GRTV later, so obviously you can't comment then. So hopefully you're watching live now. All right, so this film, I think, Caleb, you want to give us a little plot synopsis here and tell us about the movie and why are we talking about it?
Sure. So I'm not going to go through the whole synopsis, but
can you just read the whole script for us, please?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this for those people who might want to tune in, but the movie itself would be too scary to actually watch, but they want to hear the discussion, which I know that there are at least a couple people out there like that. I thought I'd give some context. We're basically at the beginning of the film dealing with a family, mother and father, William and Catherine, their oldest daughter Thomason, their oldest son Caleb. Nice job, my boy Bob Eggers there. Not too many cinematic Calebs. And then their twin siblings Mercy and Jonas, and their very small newborn baby whose name is Samuel. Anyway, they are being banished into the wilderness from their community and their church. And it's kind of vague, but we generally get the sense that the father is to blame for being too prideful. I think nowadays we would say holier than thou. And in those days, being holier than thou probably meant a lot, especially to these early settlers. I should say that this is also set in 1630, so it's very early American settling by people that had just come over from England. So as they go out into the wilderness on their own, isolated from their community, They face a lot of challenges, and like a lot of colonists at that time, they're totally unprepared for this new setting, and they're not particularly prepared to keep themselves alive, and something in the woods does not help their cause, let's say. I think that's probably all we need to say. There's an abduction very early on that sort of sends the family into a tailspin, and the rest of it is generally just the family falling apart, possibly because of dark forces, possibly because of other forces. What do you think? What did I miss?
I think that was spot on. Yeah.
Thanks.
Beautiful. Very well
Thanks.
done. All right. Well, why don't we jump in with just some kind of initial reactions of what you guys thought of the movie, and that could be whether this was your first time screening it, or if you had a different opinion when you first watched it to when you did it for homework for this. But what do you think of the movie, Virginia? Let's start with you.
Well, I want to get this in and make sure that I don't ever get distracted with other points. Kate Dickie, who plays the mother, as I said before we went live, I want her to just have a role where her breasts are not fed on in an abnormal way, because she also plays Lysa Arryn in Game of Thrones. And if people haven't watched that, she breastfeeds like a 13-year-old boy, Robin Arryn. And it's kind of like a weird scene that even the characters in Game of Thrones that deal with a lot of their own uses of breasts and genitalia, even those characters were like, whoa, 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 girl, that's a grown man on your titty. And so I was both shocked and then also was like, what a great character acting choice for yet again Kate to have just an abnormal breastfeeding situation. And a spoiler alert for those, again, we're hoping that you've seen it, but I am in fact referring to the fact where she is sort of under a spell. That's a good way to put it, I guess. But she sort of thinks that she's seeing a vision of her dead children, one being the infant that was abducted at the top of the film, and then we actually get cut into reality, and it's just a crow just pecking at her boob, bleeding everywhere. There's a lot of use of abnormal blood here too, which I do, to be fair, love generally. But here I was like, way to go, girl. You're always taking one for the team. But again, I hope eventually we can see her just with sheathed breasts, just a covering, not for modesty's sake, but just like as someone who has breastfed a human. Oh, rough. Let's give her a break. Just please, just a small break. But a genuine takeaway, a serious non-wannabe comic point. I loved the setting. I really loved the attention to period detail in a way that really it builds a trust with the audience that then later allows us to suspend the disbelief that we would need to in a way that doesn't feel like a total buy-in. Like, I am with it. And then when we finally get to that fourth act turn where, again, spoiler alert, Black Phillip actually is kind of the instigator. Maybe he's the devil, maybe he's just another demon. We don't know, but he has a book that people have to sign, which typically we associate with Lucifer versus other demons that come out of hell. Again, my biblical scholar knowledge is going to come to play here. But I loved it. I loved the tension that's being held. I love the framing choices that make everything feel claustrophobic, even though we're in the woods, we're in open setting. I think the acting was really amazing. And I believed the turmoil that this family was going through and the unraveling that happened through the distrust, right? And then in that, however supernatural these forces may be, I really took it as the buy-in was that part of it making it true was the fact that the family believed it to be true, right? They believed Thomasin was a witch, so therefore that opened up the possibility for her to become a witch. They believed that there was this this terror plaguing them, and I think that belief actually opened the door for that to happen. And so I really liked that was sort of how the story was presented to us, and not in a way that felt unearned, I guess. And especially for a period piece that really was not reliant on any sort of special effect kind of until the end. I appreciated how it still really created a sense of supernatural foreboding in absentia of special effects, which we don't often see these days as being something that is really believable in that way. So I really loved it. And I also just, my brother, shout out to Trevor, we have a joke among us that anytime a film falls under the 3 S's, we love it, which is spooky, space, or sorcery. And this is spooky and sorcery, so it really hit a lot of points for me emotionally to just go in to love it. And then all the other
2
layers.
on the 3-point S system.
Two of 3 S's.
Yeah.
I give it 2 of if you will. It's not a full. But yeah, just loved it, and it makes me actually really want to see The Lighthouse, which I haven't had a chance to watch yet. But this then kind of emotionally and aesthetically preps me for being like, oh, I know that's gonna be a wild ride too. And is Robert Pattinson gonna breastfeed anyone? We don't know.
Probably.
Who knows?
Wish.
TBD.
Yeah. One
Maybe
can only
spoiler
hope.
alert. Yeah, exactly. So.
Well, there's a lot there that we will be unpacking, especially regarding kind of the like period accurate aspects of the film, which is one thing that I really love about it too. And I know Hayes and I have talked about this movie in great detail before.
At length.
So, yes. So I'm really excited for us to be able to hash all that stuff out again. But Hayes, what's your takeaway? What do you think about this movie?
Yeah, Virginia actually hit on kind of my main favorite plot element of this, which was like the Thomason's self-fulfilling prophecy, or the family's self-fulfilling prophecy around Thomason. This whole like, accusing her of a witch, and then it's kind of just like, F it, I'm gonna be a witch. For some reason that really hit well with me, especially after, like Virginia said, the whole tension building of the movie. The kind of what do I want to say, me, I always hone in on the audio stuff because that's my realm, and just not only the kind of open visual spaces that are presented in the film, but the kind of like open aural textures that are paired with that, I think really helps build the tension there. We'll talk about this later, but the film employs a lot of like natural sounds to build tension, and not just like natural sounds, but like folk instrument sounds. So things that like evoke this like 17th century kind of imagery and stuff like that. So those were some of my favorite things. It's not like your typical like Halloween horror movie where there's like a crappy synth in the background playing like really dark pads. And Mark Corbin, the guy who scored the film, actually talks about how he specifically tried to use these sounds to get away from that like trope of horror films using these really stock synthy samples and things like that. So I really dug that. That was some of my thoughts on it, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting how the score of this film is not something, I don't want to say like it's not iconic in a rude way, but it's nothing like a John Williams score that you can easily identify later,
Of
like
course.
the Jaws theme or something.
It's one of those things where like the score is transparent because it pairs with the imagery so well, in my opinion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you don't separate the two things. They are like one entity.
Exactly. It's still haunting, even if it's not something that you're going to be humming later necessarily. But
well, when we talk about the thing that made the music for the film, if you can hum those sounds, then, like,
then you need to go to the doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
I was singing the theme in the shower this morning.
Were you?
Guys are talking about, yeah.
I could have guessed that, yeah.
Weirdo.
So Caleb, what about you? Anything you want to add to it about what you loved or hated about the movie? I don't know.
I think it might be my favorite horror film of the last decade, honestly.
Whoa.
I don't know
Yeah.
what else would really be that. Obviously, Robert Eggers was unknown at the time that it came out. It's his first feature. and so I didn't know what to expect from him. And I think also as a person who, I mostly watch older horror. I watch a lot of horror, but I mostly watch pre-90s, let's say, horror. And a lot of times when I do watch something new, it's disappointing. There's just a lot of garbage out there, or just kind of same old stuff out there. And so when I'm blown away by something new, I'm really blown away. And this one hit every sweet spot that I've got. I love folk horror. I love the time period is specifically very frightening to me. The isolation.
Is it the lack of technology that's scary too? Because that is what it like. That's a genuine question. That's like a part of what scares me in it.
It's not so much the lack of technology as just the complete man versus nature, desperate. You got nothing.
Yeah.
You have nothing at all. Like,
You can't go to the Home Depot to buy an axe
No.
if yours breaks, right? Like that's
look around you and like just try to survive. Good luck. I also had a really specific experience watching it, where when I was growing up, we lived out in the country, and during the day I loved the woods and I ran around the woods all the time. Great, love it. But at night, especially across the road from our house, the woods were very similar to what they look like in this film, where it's just kind of like open space, open space, open space, and then they just start. It's like a door you have to walk through to get
the
into
tree
them.
line is just like really stark, like a
And it's-
curtain, right?
And even during the day, it's dark inside. So at night, I would just look out my window and look at those dark woods and just think about all the horrific things going on in there, and all of the monsters that were roaming, that had been unleashed from secret laboratories.
Let's talk about your childhood, Caleb.
Well, I'm just
Get
saying,
into
in addition to it being a really wonderful film with insane performances, it hit me personally in a very, very disturbing way that I apparently like a lot and like to return to. 'Cause I saw it like 5
That
times
makes a lot of
so,
sense.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think you guys kind of all touched on things that I like about it. I just really love Robert Eggers' work and A24 films, and just kind of the dark, atmospheric aspect to them. This film is very contemplative, and I love that. I love something that's like a super slow burn. I usually really love a feel-bad movie, just because it's incredible that, I mean, if you think about it, with the technology of film, I mean, if we go old school, 24 frames per second, it's like a glorified flip book. So you're just seeing a sequence of images, and then you have sound, which, it's just like these experiences that can impact you so deeply is absolutely fascinating. And that's why, of course, I love to be part of these discussions, is like really break it down and understand, why did that creep me out? Or why did that linger like in my subconscious for so long? Or why did the score work so well for it? I love to analyze that, and this movie is a great one for that. And I know we have a whole lot to unpack with this film, and there's probably a lot more that we could be talking about tonight that we're not going to get to. So hopefully people will be commenting on here, and we can kind of keep this conversation going. So just a little reminder, again, if you guys are watching live, please comment if you have some questions for the panel, or something that you picked up on in the movie that you want to throw in here, let us know. Okay, so let me pull up.
I apologize, by the way. I keep shifting all my stuff. It's because I don't know, Hayes, how you are getting a glaireless glasses, but I don't know if y'all have been watching me just try to navigate this.
I will tell you, just 20-second tangent, I bought a ring light today. It has changed my life.
How Kim Kardashian of you. I know. Oh my God.
Yeah, check out my YouTube channel for my makeup tutorials next week, okay?
Listen, if you did that, I 100% would subscribe, so that's not even a joke. Could be a career path.
How do you think there's no glare on my head?
No, I apologize because I keep moving, and I'm like, I think I just need to I can't. It's gonna be there. You're gonna think my eyes are bright squares.
It's unavoidable, bud. You got it.
It's all good. All good.
Yeah.
All right. So this film, the subtitle of it is A New England Folktale, which kind of brings me to the first topic that we can get into, of this being like folk horror, or I'd like to call it folklore.
Yeah,
I think I'll go ahead and coin that phrase right there. Thank you very much.
Copyright
I will-
2020.
That's right. That's right. Make all checks payable to Sarah Naraki. So what does that kind of mean to you guys? How are we breaking this down and calling it a folklore horror or folk horror? What do you think?
Well, historically, folk horror is usually applied to to films that kind of began in the late 60s and early 70s in the UK. Probably the most recognizable to modern audiences would be The Wicker Man. There's sort of an unholy trinity of The Wicker Man, Witchfinder General, and
Sorry, I was just going to say, not the bees!
no, not that one. The older one. Witchfinder General, and a film called The Blood on Satan's Claw, which has one of the most amazing titles in history. And they all sort of, they didn't all have to do with witches, but some of the same elements were all involved, which was sort of the pastoral landscape that's also somewhat sinister or terrifying. Small rural communities that were isolated from the larger world, ancient rituals, supernatural forces, and usually a pretty bleak ending. So to me, that, The Witch definitely falls into that category. It was really big in the 70s in Britain, and we sort of saw a resurgence of it over here closer to the turn of the millennium, where we had like the Blair Witch Project. Later on we had like The Village, and then really in the last 5 years there's been a lot more, I think probably spurred on by the critical success of this film. Obviously Midsummer, Kill List, a couple other Ben Wheatley joints, The Ritual, which is another really good modern folk horror one. So to me, it says all of those things. It's the strange sort of relationship between man and nature, and the relationship between usually like an outsider coming into a community where they soon realize that things are not what they seem, and they might be completely out of their element, and should be very afraid.
I want to touch on one particular thing that you said there. When you're getting into kind of these like phases of this folk horror, such as the Blair Witch, and not to say there's no folk horror before that, but I'm just going to start right there, which that was 1999, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. One of the greatest years for movies, I'll just say. So one of the classes that I've taught at Grand Valley is film culture, and I know Hayes has taught the music equivalent of that, where we kind of break down movies and what they parallel to in society and what's going on in that time. So I'm just kind of curious why you guys think that folk horror had sort of a resurgence around the Blair Witch Project, and then again we're seeing it popping up as of 2015 with this. Do you think there's any reason, like what's going on in the world, why that subgenre of horror would be appealing to the masses?
You're saying like circa 99?
Yeah, 99, and then like 2015. We can go with those milestones.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, I think when I think of folklore in general, horror removed, I always think that there's an element of like a morality tale, right? There's sort of an element of a lesson to be learned in some way. And maybe that's not a blanket statement, but for me, when I think of anything that is like lore based, I almost feel like there's an intention behind the story to kind of teach you something, or there's a takeaway. And I think there's probably an argument that could be made that, we cycle as humans in needing our media and what we consume to sort of be a reflection of what we are going through. And so I could definitely see there being some sort of correlation between like, I don't know, I keep looking back on Facebook memories, and it's like every year is like, man, this is a trash can fire, isn't it? And it's been like that since like, 2014-ish. And I think that there's there's probably something to be said about wanting and needing morality tales, ethical tales, things that kind of both challenge us or in some ways maybe reinforce things that we already believe, but that are not just as straightforward. We talk about slasher films being kind of a response to the culture at the time, right? And we've talked about that before. I know, Sarah, you've gotten into that, of slasher films kind of being reactionary to that time period. I think that there's probably something to be said for people just kind of being like, you know what I want with my, bloody goat's milk is like a dose of why, hubris and pride are probably as big of a threat to this family as actual demons or ghosts or witches, could be. That would be my guess.
That's interesting.
Well, Sarah, I'm guessing that your question is leading to the fact that in 1999, we're really just a few years into the internet, and everything since then has been connecting, constant stimulus, constant social interaction, social media. And the more that increases, the idea of being isolated from, example, this movie, the family is on their own. They don't even have a community. They don't ever even see anybody else. So it's the ultimate lack of any connectivity that I think horrifies audiences today, even more than it would have audiences in 1970 watching a folk horror.
I think you're totally onto something there, Caleb, because we're taking a step out of the realm of horror now, but I've been watching the show Schitt's Creek a lot lately, right?
I love it.
It's an amazing show. But like the scariest thing to that family is that they're all stuck together on their own in this time. You know what I mean? That's kind of like the driving force behind all of the like negative crap that happens in the show. So I think there's something to go with Caleb's kind of thesis on this, you know what I mean, that as we get more interconnected, it only becomes scarier.
Right. Yeah. I think the other half of that too, aside from like these environments like in the movie, in the horror film, being the lack of connectivity when we are in real life hyper connected, right? And as you said, 1999, we're just getting into the realm of the internet. 2015, we are way deep in it, drowning in it per se.
Yeah.
I think the other half of it is even kind of the fear of this invisible force that comes with the internet. Not literally like the dark web, but it is just this vast universe. Like if you try to envision what the universe is, which we're not going to get into that discussion because my brain will probably explode. But just that you can't really like see it. It's like a faceless entity. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
And whether that's like personifying the internet or it could be like the armchair activists or the trolls that are out there, that you don't know, is it a real person? Is it a bot? It's just this like invisible, ominous force that I think parallels really well to Caleb's very healthy fear of the dark woods.
Well, it's also something that we don't, it's been 20 plus years, but we don't really know what it is yet. We don't know what it's going to be. And I see a pretty clear parallel with English colonists coming over here and going, okay, what is this land? What are we going to do with it? Why don't our crops grow the same way that they did back home? Why don't, what are these animals that we're not used to? Like, it's just this weird thing that we're trying to figure out, and there's no instruction book at all.
And I feel like 2015 might have been, and I don't have like information handy in front of me, so I might be super wrong here, but isn't that kind of when we had some threats of like government jumping in on, controlling what is the internet and like free speech stuff and, trying to actually
Net neutrality. Net neutrality was
a
huge topic. From pretty much the late Obama administration, for like his second term, that was kind of like a big deal. In 2015, we were like right in the throes of that whole discussion.
Yeah. So this just could be like an unconscious fear, and putting it in the context of a dark woods. And I like how, let me pull up the picture again here when Caleb was talking about the fear of the woods and how it's just like that dark line. It's like a wall there, I love that, thinking about that with like the internet and what's beyond it. So
Yeah, you could be looking at a Google browser window right there, just
that's how I feel anytime I'm going to Google something. I'm like, oh God,
Death is
what am I
ominous.
doing? Cool. So I guess the other thing we can kind of get into about what I feel works really well for this movie is the slow burn aspect of it. Are there any other like movies or books or anything that you guys thought of when you were watching this that you could recommend too if you like that slow burn style?
Well, I know that Robert Eggers constantly cites The Shining as his main inspiration for this film, and once you learn that and you start to look for parallels, there's a ton of parallels between The Shining and this one. Little things, and also just a general sense of dread that builds throughout, I think. So that's definitely one.
That's great. I'd never thought about that before, but
Yeah.
the unraveling of that family and the characters, you know what I mean? It's totally parallels in that same kind of way. Yeah, I like that.
And you got a father who's kind of losing his mind and just incessantly does the same things over and over again. And it's, I think, both in tone and in some of the content, you can really see a clear line. Although you would never watch The Witch and go, oh, he's just ripping off The Shining.
Yeah.
Which is great. I think it's really successful in that way.
Yeah, agreed.
I think earlier, Hayes, you had mentioned The Village, and I am one. Maybe it was Caleb. I can't remember. I'm one of those people that is like totally a Village apologist. I love it.
I dig it.
I love
Oh,
it. It's such a great
it's good.
movie. I know that it's really lost a lot of its like shine over the last decade. People love to just like throw that movie under the bus as some sort of, and I'm like, listen, it was not The Happening, okay? The trees were not attacking people, and
Yes.
lawnmowers weren't running over
Exactly.
people. Like, and I went into the film the first time I saw it not knowing the twist. Truly was able to just watch it and
Yeah.
absorb it. And like
Same.
a little nerdy insight into my life, I walked down the aisle to the song, the score that plays in the scene where basically Bryce Dallas Howard's character is like, will you dance with me at our wedding? And he's like, why won't you let me lead? There's this really beautiful music that there's a violinist named Hilary Hahn that does the majority of the music in that film. And that was what I walked down the aisle to. People were very confused. They didn't know when to stand up because it was untraditional. But I love that film. I truly, the decision, T to B, top to bottom, of how he shot that long takes with theater actors, long dolly shots, following feet, across the screen, like, and then really that slow burn into the third act where, we see her in, the barn where she's finally, it's been revealed by her father that, they are suits and things like that. I loved it. Thought it was great. And so, of course, I think there's an immediate connection that probably a lot of people could make just even visually in tone to The Village, but also that woods barrier, was also another one. I almost half expected like yellow flags to kind of
Yeah.
be like in the distance a little
Well,
bit.
and it's all like kind of underexposed or something. You guys would know how to, right?
Natural lighting a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe even underexposed. He shoot this on film?
I have no clue.
I think it
know.
was digital. I feel like the aspect ratio was a little bit wider, though. I think I read something about him wanting to kind of create a more condensed, crushing feel,
Yeah, like a
right?
squeezed kind of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So like the framing always kind of just hit the top of the trees. There was not really a lot of excess space above it.
You don't see the sky a lot, right? Yeah, that's
No, yeah. And so I think it was very, for me, that was like my immediate association was The Village, which again, forever stan. I'll fight anybody who wants to talk smack about that movie.
You know who knows a lot about aspect ratio? Go over
What
Sarah
up?
here.
Oh my God, you guys, I have a PowerPoint ready for you to talk about
Nice.
aspect ratio.
Yes.
No.
Aren't you excited? So
Nerd time.
let's take a trip down memory lane back to the old Academy original. So when we're talking 35 millimeter, the film stuff that movies used to be made on. The stuff that's also cluttering up my basement right now in the best way possible.
Hoarder.
Yeah. Yes, I will admit.
Classic basement staple.
Who doesn't have film in their basement? Come on, or the trunk of their car or on their porch. Anyway, so I've got the guide here just to give you kind of an overview of what aspect ratios were like and how it's kind of progressed over time. So the top left there, the 1.33 to 1, that was the Academy standard, and actually you'd be looking at the black box on the outside. I added the red one, and we'll get back to that. So movies used to be cropped like that, and as you go down the line, you can see the dotted lines to show that compared to what it shifted to. When we got to around the 50s, when TVs were born and when they made their ways into homes, the Academy decided that they had to kind of compete with that, and what can you do if TV, the old CRT TVs, that's like a pretty square ratio. How do we compete with that? What can we do at the theater, even though it's already a pretty fully immersive experience? Well, they shifted to widescreen. So if you kind of looking down at the next two, that's the direction we went. And the one that's in green is where we're traditionally at right now. Anamorphic projection below that is not uncommon. That's kind of your 16:9 ratio. So with the Witch, it is cropped. That would be the blue one that you see in the middle there. So it's just a teeny bit tighter than a widescreen and a little more compressed, so it does kind of chop off and make it feel a little claustrophobic. But Robert Eggers' other film, The Lighthouse, which I believe was 2019, he went even tighter with that. So let me show you here what that looks like. With that, it's a 1.19 to 1 ratio, so it's almost exactly square and incredibly claustrophobic. So compare that to what The Witch looked like. If you go back and forth, you can kind of see how it's just a little bit wider.
Interesting.
But it's got that claustrophobic feel to it, It's chopping it off. It feels really isolated. So I think it's a really neat technique of utilizing aspect ratio and not just going with, let's go super widescreen. I want to get everything in there. And really, if you think about the setting, let me pull up, we'll just go with this good classic picture here. It's a really beautiful landscape. Even though it's very simple, everything, all the mise-en-scène of this film is just stunning. So you would think that you would want to go full widescreen, but by cropping it like that, it adds to this unconscious experience. Just like if you have dark and ominous music, you're not really like, ooh, there's dark, ominous music that's making me feel spoopy. That's just what doing this kind of thing, like what that kind of cinematography and direction style does to add to the movie. So yes, thank you for bringing up aspect ratio. I love talking about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw The Lighthouse in the theater, but it was such a strange experience for that reason. It was so strange to be in a celebration cinema and have that giant screen and have so much of it on either side be just black.
Oh, they didn't move in the curtains to kind of...
It looked just like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and
great.
actually, I did not measure this out, so it's not to scale. So it would be a little bit tighter. And what Caleb's talking about, when I saw it, the opening shots, it was very stylized, and I thought oh, okay, maybe they're doing it so that if you're watching it on your phone, that it's more of that vertical style, so that could work. So I was waiting for it to shift over to a widescreen, and it never did. And then it just makes you feel okay, I can't really move or breathe. And it was very fitting since this movie, I guess, spoiler alert, takes place in a lighthouse. So it's this tall structure, and you're stuck inside
yet,
of it.
Sarah. Jeez.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I'll see myself out. Okay, so I want to make sure that we're getting to a lot of these points. We do have some time left, but one of my favorite things about this movie and why I am super stoked to have Hayes here is to talk about the music for it. So I mentioned dark and ominous and how, the atmosphere of the soundtrack is very creepy. So Hayes, can you kind of tell us more about the music in this movie?
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, after your last little tidbit there, my whole view of why the music works so well just kind of shifted, because you're confined to this visual space, like you're cramped into this visual space, and then you are subjected to the psychological torture that is the apprehension engine. Cue picture.
Bam!
Yeah.
There it is.
Oh, well named.
Yeah, right. So
Well,
this
and
was,
the nickname is the Nightmare Machine, is that right?
yeah, the nickname is the Nightmare
Ooh.
Machine, and there's a great YouTube video actually that I was going to say everyone that's watching right now should totally go look this up. It's just called Sounds of the Nightmare Machine, and it's Mark Corvin talking about, like, he actually had this instrument commissioned. So he had done some film scoring before this. I actually haven't seen this movie, and it's been on my list for a while. Has anyone seen The Cube? This is a movie that he scored it for, and it's apparently like a cult horror sci-fi classic thing.
I have not seen that, no.
But he was like very synth heavy forever, is what I'm getting at. You know, very synthetically oriented with his sounds. When he was kind of commissioned to write the score for this movie, he wanted something more natural sounding, because of the setting of the movie and the time period and all that stuff. So really what we're looking at is kind of like a hybrid instrument here. So those are like metal rulers that are sticking out like kind of toward the body of the person playing the instrument right there. And if anyone's ever seen someone play the saw, you know, like with a bow, like the actual like wood, cutting instrument, it's kind of a similar technique. Like he draws a bow across those rulers, and that's where you get those really grating kind of like moans that happen throughout the film. It's also you can see those kind of two strings that his right hand is directly above in that picture. So has anyone ever heard of the instrument the hurdy-gurdy?
Sure.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, like there's that song called the
That
hurdy-gurdy
sounds
man.
made up.
Yeah,
You
right.
just made that up.
Yeah, exactly. It's this weird old medieval instrument that has a crank with a wheel. You can see the wheel directly under his right wrist there. So there's a crank that he cranks, and that wheel acts as a bow across two strings and creates this really whining kind of wispy sound on the strings. And that actually would have been an instrument that people in 17th century America would have known about. You know, it was an instrument. So they were kind of being period correct there. All sorts of other things, you know, like if you're looking at the top of the instrument there, you can see some kind of metal pieces. Those are just like little coins and batteries that he would slide across the top. It's kind of like an echo chamber underneath there. And then some kind of pendulums off there to the right on that very top tier that he would pick up and then drop, and they would slap on the top. It's kind of like when you hit a doorstop, you know what I mean, and it kind of chatters for a while. So it's this really versatile instrument, and every sound is absolutely unpleasurable. Like I don't think there's like I don't think this thing could make a sweet sound if it tried. And you'll notice that in the film too, like when they're walking through the woods, the texture for the score is not dense. You know what I mean? There's like maybe one or two sounds happening at a time, and they're these really repetitive kind of harsh, like metal knocking on wood kind of sounds for the most of the time. It's almost like Chinese water torture kind of score. You know what I mean? Like it's this really repetitive thing that adds to the tension, especially like with what Sarah said. You're cropped into this tighter frame. They're in the woods. It's dark. And then you have this really repetitive, ominous sound. You know, it's almost like akin to someone who's nervous shaking their knee, you know, like when they're sitting down. So that's a little bit behind like the apprehension engine. They also used another instrument, which is common. It actually is not period correct, but but it evokes some of the same kind of imagery of like 17th century America, and it's called the Nickel Harper.
That is not how you pronounced it earlier.
Yeah.
Let's hear it, Hayes.
Nickel Harper. It's a traditional Swedish folk instrument. It's a fiddle actually. So you kind of play it. It's slung like down by your waist, And there's a little bow that you draw across the strings, and your hands go on those like wooden keys that you see jutting out of the neck there. And it's similar in tonality to the hurdy-gurdy. That instrument, like, I love it. People, are watching this and they're like, Nickel Harper, hurdy-gurdy. This guy's just like making crap up. You know what I mean?
And it's true.
Yes, yeah. I actually just got the script for this 5 minutes before the podcast. No, anyways, but the Nickel Harper has a really grating, kind of wispy, yet what do I want to say? Like natural acoustic sound that definitely evokes a lot of spooky, kind of open, airy, woodsy kind of images.
Do you know how far off of the time period it is from
the
movie?
Probably. Well, here's the thing. It's not that it's that far off of the time period. It's just that people in Sweden were definitely playing these things back then, but people like English immigrants would not really have known much about the Nickel Harper, and it would not have been a common instrument in the early Americas.
Okay.
So it's I guess not period correct is maybe not the right term to use, but
it's not location or like culturally correct. To
culturally
those immigrants.
specific.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They would have been more familiar with like little, like pipe organ type things and keyboard instruments and fiddles and flutes and stuff like that. But it's still, like, I don't want to split any hairs on this. It evokes the correct imagery, which is, I think, why they used it. And Corvin specifically says that in an interview that he did on, what was the name of that magazine?
Flugenhyphen.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
I couldn't remember the name of that thing.
Score It magazine. It's a
cool.
magazine for like film scoring. But yeah.
Hayes, did you say that this instrument made kind of like a creaky noise? Was that this one?
Yes. So there are a couple different things on there that make the creaky sound. That hurdy-gurdy part of it does it. But then there are also like kind of So the Nickel Harper, specifically those wooden keys, as you push them in, like that's wood on wood. You know what I mean? So you get some kind of like, it's like when your chair scooches across a wood floor. You know what I mean? You get that kind of sound. So that's natural to the instrument. You get these clicks and weird things happening in there. So yeah, it's a really interesting instrument that way. A lot of people, musicians specifically, complain about that because it creates a lot of non-musical noise, they would call it, on recordings. But for the purpose of like horror film scoring, I think it works very well.
Well, and with this environment too, since of course we're talking about this being a rural horror film in the woods, and
exactly,
it like kind of fits the textures and what you could hear with
metallic
like trees
sounds
creaking.
Wouldn't fit, right? Like wood on woods is better, especially like Caleb was talking about. You're looking at this backdrop that is the woods the entire time. This like curtain of trees. So I think that's why they specifically chose those types of instruments for the film, and in my opinion, it was genius. Wouldn't have worked with those Michael Myers style synth pads. Wouldn't have worked.
Oh. I'm sorry. I'm here all night.
Yeah.
Well, the other element of the score is the choral singing, or sort of choral yelping. That occurs during some really
pocket, they call that, or whatever.
Yeah, that happens when you're. I think the first time you hear it is when you're looking at the tree line, and I think it really evokes, the idea that you should be afraid of this. That there's, a foreboding feeling of what's beyond that, and it also occurs at the end of the film when kind of the climax of everything is happening and the pure horror is unleashed. And something that I didn't think about until this recent rewatch was, it's basically the same kind of choral arrangement as you hear in 2001 during some climactic parts of that. Yeah. Which is Kubrick, who directed The Shining. So I think that Eggers probably is a huge Kubrick head, not just for The Shining, but for some other things too. Definitely,
yeah. The style of singing that happens in there too is pretty common for early New England settlers too. There's this book called The Sacred Harp hymnal, which has a lot of kind of spooky sounding kind of choral pieces that people used to sing back during those times. With like for music nerds out there, it uses open fourths and fifths, which give you these like kind of Gregorian chant style vibes. And I think that was used, in the kind of way that you're talking about here.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of this movie that is historically accurate or pays a good homage to that, and kind of involved in the same way of like the Nickel Harper you're saying is not an instrument that would have been widely used then, but the sounds kind of like play into the atmosphere. Caleb, I feel like you've probably done a lot of research on, I guess the research that Robert Eggers did to create this film. Where did he draw inspiration, and what are some other, even like little things about this film that are pulling from historically relevant items?
It's all little things with Eggers. I know that he was a former production designer before he directed anything, and I don't think I've ever heard the stories that I've heard about him and his demands for accuracy on this film are unlike anything I've heard from any other effort. Down to every stitch of the costuming. There were no shortcuts made in the construction of the family's home and the barn. It had to be constructed using only period accurate methods. Even they wouldn't bring in a bulldozer and use that.
Well, and even
like,
with the house, sorry to jump in, but I think I read that the house was reconstructed from like the surviving plans of one of the oldest timber houses in New England.
Ooh.
So they actually had blueprints from that. I don't know what period it was that he built it off of, but even just down to the architecture of it and taking original blueprints to build it is amazing. What else did you find?
Well, and I know that he, in the dialogue, he just poured through so many period sources to find the dialogue that he basically rearranged into the script for this movie.
So he took some stuff from Cotton Mather's journals about, so Cotton Mather was like a bastard that was like real big in the witch trials, and he wrote meticulously about accounts that basically people had given about what they would say when they were possessed or whatever. So when the brother kind of barfs up that apple and then dies, a lot of that dialogue I think was actually really reflective of some of Cotton Mather's journals. I don't know why I know that. I did research for this and it just popped into my head, but there was also a show on UPN, that's not a network anymore, but it was called Salem, and for like 2 or 3 seasons was like really focused on that, and Cotton Mather was actually like a character in this like UPN drama, and I was like, okay, but he historically actually was very interested in like keeping like records and like journals of like what people had really said, and I know that was one of the things that Eggers consulted as well and was like kind of in on it, which is like they had really great wigs back then. I guess that's the only thing I can say is, men wore wigs, ladies wore wigs. I think it had to do with hair loss and stuff, but like whatever. But anyway, he was like a Protestant minister, and so a lot of what he was interested in was actually like the demonic possession elements to it, and so I know that was one of the sources too.
What else did you find, Caleb?
That's all I got, other than I remember a couple of interviews with him, with Robert Eggers, where he mentioned that he was the kid in school who wore costumes to school, not on like Halloween week or anything, just anytime, just these period specific costumes that he made himself. So if that's what we're dealing with, fast forward to his first directorial feature, he's probably going to be really specific in that way. And I think
it's amazing.
It shows. This is a film that never feels anything less than 100% accurate the whole way through, and it just plops you right in there. I think that's one of the reasons it's so scary to me.
Yeah. Well, and even down to, we're talking little details, the typography. Caleb, do you want to tell us about even the title card of it, and what's up with the double V? Why not a W?
Oh, I didn't do too much research into that other than I don't. It seems weird, but I read that the W wasn't in wide use at the time, which it's like, what does that mean? you didn't have the whole. I guess the whole alphabet wasn't perfect, like fully formed as we think of it now. And I'm not an expert on the alphabet, although I'd like to be.
I've heard a little bit about this stuff too, but like standard English was not a thing until like almost a century later.
Yeah.
Which yeah.
You see F's in places of where S's should be a lot of times.
Yep.
In this kind of period, but I don't know. That's something that I think is really fascinating that I don't unfortunately know too much more about.
Well, and this W, or the double V, I should say, was pulled from, the typography was pulled from a Jacobean witchcraft pamphlet. The subtitle was modeled after the first printed publications of English poet John Milton. So yeah, pulling from historically accurate resources too, which is just great. Another thing with, I guess we'll say historically appropriate. This is a theory that I brought up in the podcasts that I did on this movie with Hayes, and come to find out after doing a little more research, it's not entirely true, but I really wish that it was the theory about the hallucinogenic corn. And you guys, I'm so full of dad jokes here.
Oh, God.
That's really bad.
You're welcome.
Take it away. Take it away.
No, it's staying up the rest of the night. So ergot is a fungus that in one place that I read they said that it could grow on corn, which is not entirely accurate. Though I suppose it could have transferred from like the stalk or something, but it's more commonly found on like wheat and, grass and that kind of plant, not so much on corn. But there's like a quick throwaway shot here where you're seeing that the corn that they have is, diseased or just moldy. It's not good. And that's part of the problem too, is like crops are dying and they're running out of food. But the whole theory with ergot that goes back to even the Salem witch trials is that theoretically people were consuming this, which has hallucinogenic properties that could have been an explanation for people acting strange, or, what would be like witch qualities, if you will. So I was really excited when I heard about this ergot theory that kind of ties in of like, is she hallucinating at the end? Is this all part of that? Not so much, but it's still interesting that it could have been part of it, and it would have made sense with how detailed he gets. So I had to bring that up.
Yeah, I think that Eggers has sort of shied away from saying yes or no for sure on that. I don't think it really matters. You can think about it both ways and it works. You can think about it sort of in between. The way that I think of it is it contributes to the family's paranoia and their splitting apart and, possibly things that are exaggerated in their life. Something I was thinking about on a rewatch was that opening with Thomason and Samuel, where she's playing peekaboo and he disappears and she's just in the middle of this big field, and it's sort of like, well, even if it was the witch, how did the witch take the baby away so fast? You know what I mean? But maybe if she's hallucinating, or if her perception of time or her surroundings are altered by this fungus, maybe she blacked out for a minute and a wolf really did take the baby or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's so many points during the film that you could look through and go, oh, right here, I bet you the fungus was responsible for this. Right here, maybe this is what they're seeing, but maybe it's not quite what's happening.
But guys, we see a witch later, not just even at the end. We see the witch like attack the brother, right? So like,
Right.
I mean, are we thinking that that's possibly a corn hallucination too? Or I guess from go I was like, oh, they're witches. Okay.
Oh yeah,
I'm into it. There's witches everywhere. Like,
I definitely take that stance. I just think it's a fun extra layer to add to it, where
that's fair.
something. It's a fun way to think about it in a new a new way, I guess, after you've seen it a few times.
I think when I saw those dying crops, honestly, I keep going back to it being just a reflection of the ego of the father, right? William is his name, I think. Because I don't know. Every time we talk about like puritanical culture, which I guess is a lot, I say it like I'm talking about it all the time, but when that gets brought up and this idea of new settlers coming to pursue religious freedom, it's like interesting that right off the bat, that only goes so far, right? Like he's being exiled or chooses to exile himself from his colony because he feels so intently that his interpretation of, I'm assuming, we don't really get the details, but I'm assuming that his interpretation of, you know, Christianity or scripture or what it is to sort of follow God is in opposition in some way to the colony. And so then I almost, for me, a lot of what I see subsequently of the things that could be seen as like either spooky attacking the crops or maybe that mold attacking it, it's like I kind of always was reading it as like, this dad, man, he's just like going farther down this hole of trying to convince himself and his family that he made the right decision, when it just clearly is showing like probably not. Like maybe you haven't grown corn before, like I don't know what your function was in the village, but like
right. It's entirely possible he's just not good at farming, because he's not good at anything
right, yeah.
other than
except for chopping wood. Exactly. Yeah.
He can't shoot the rabbit. I mean, I'm assuming that probably his wife did most of the building of the house.
Okay, and just to jump in there, they were using smoothbore guns. They were not accurate back then, Caleb. All right, so
okay. All right.
That's so weird, Hayes. I was gonna say that. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, and we have a comment here from Jeff, who is watching, who just says that fungus is not as fun anyway. And I think I agree. I like to believe that it's real witches and it's not, this two storyline potentials of, was it all just a dream or is it all reality? I think I agree with you, Jeff, that fungus is not as fun. Let's keep going with the real witches.
And that was definitely part of the reason that I really reacted so strongly to this film when I first saw it, is because your expectation is, it's going to be this. So many times, especially in modern horror films, you see sort of ambiguous events, and then at the end of it, it's explained away like, she's actually insane, or it was all a dream, or it's not really happening. And the fact that we actually get a visual confirmation of a witch within like 10 minutes, I was totally blown away and did not expect that. It's like, no, it's actually the witch. Like, it's actually, you're going to go there. And then it's like,
wait a second.
At the end, it's like, Black Phillip, okay, it's going to be vague. It's like, is he Satan? Is he not? It's like, no, there's a hand on her shoulder. It's Satan. Yeah, it's happening. Love that.
Speaking of Black Phillip, we just got a comment here from Sky. Anything special to say about Black Phillip, the real-life rib breaker?
Oof.
So let me pull up a picture of our best friend here.
I mean, I would have done it too. Again, by that time, I'm like real tired of William. I'm tired of the paranoia that he's allowed. But also, right, the blame. It goes back to the period accuracy of what the Salem witch trials were. I think this movie starts about 30 or so years before the witch trials really were in earnest. But that idea that really was always matching up overt femininity with an ability to be led astray and used as a tool of the devil. Like, no knock against Christianity specifically, but that's been a thing that kind of has been utilized and kind of, I would say incorrectly, but because of the story of Adam and Eve, right? There's oftentimes an extrapolation that that a lot of extremists would make about the fallibility of women in particular and their ability to be used as tools for evil and witchcraft. And so when you look at the roots of the Salem witch trials in particular, there were some men that were kind of involved, but it was like such a tiny percentage in comparison to it being almost exclusively women. And so seeing that mirrored in the relationship that her family, Thomason's family, has with her, by the end of it, damn, he was ready to like sell her to another family because he couldn't hunt, and because he had the wrong kind of gun, but he couldn't farm. He couldn't, just like do nothing but chop wood. I bet, yeah, the wife put the mud all up on that house. We don't know, but all of his failures then are projected to be some sort of like, they're not personal failings, but they are a reflection somehow of what Thomason is like inflicting upon them. And so honestly, him getting buried by all that damn wood that he had been chopping, I was like, yes, like give me the symbolism of getting buried in your sins. Like give me this moment of like, and also there was no grandiose build up to Black Phillip kind of taunting him to death. It straight up was like, okay, boom, you're gored, we're done, I'm over this, I'm not trying to have you anymore, William. And at that point, I honestly, to our lovely viewers' question, I was like rooting for Black Phillip at that point. I was like, yes, do it, gore him, because I just was so over the dad and the mom to a degree. I was over this projection of the familial failure collectively being pushed upon Thomason, who basically the whole movie was like, y'all, I'm just here to help. Like,
yeah, she didn't do anything.
Didn't do anything.
Didn't do
was just straight up, I didn't do it. I'm sorry that, I was watching the baby when he got napped, but I didn't nap that kid, like there's such a projection of the family pushing everything onto her as a scapegoat.
Thank you.
See,
Thank you. It's not just me. Not just
did
me.
it.
I'm outta here,
it.
Well, and to piggyback off of what Virginia's saying, Jeff actually threw a comment in here that I'll pull up on the screen of similar sentiments. That there's the sins of the father underlined in this. And we channel that witch infiltration through the young virginal figure. Yes, very classic there. But it's really the father's failing that allows this to happen. So thank you for that, Jeff. I think we're all kind of feeling that's pretty spot on of the story. Yeah.
We all wanted William to die. We don't know what that
I wanted
says
him to
about
die
us
like
as
5
people.
minutes into the movie, so.
The first time he chopped wood, I truly was like, oh, are we going to have an accident here? Like, who knows? And then he just...
I'm sorry. I'll quit.
We're just doing it now. We're doing it.
I'm out.
My baby just moaned. He was like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I'm one and I can't deal with that. So.
Oh, my goodness. All right, there was another comment in here I wanted to pull up real quick. This kind of segues a little bit out, but jumping back earlier, Caleb's mom threw in a comment here, and let's see, where'd that go?
Did she really?
She did. Well, of course she did.
Of course she did.
So, yeah, segueing quite a ways out, though, but aside from the time period difference and the whole witch thing, any other parallels that we see between The Witch and A Quiet Place? Did you guys see that movie, A Quiet Place?
Yeah, it's so good. Oh,
I have
I
not
loved
seen
it.
this movie, yeah.
Oh,
But
it's-
spoil
I
it.
mean, it's also I would also call it a slow burn for sure.
Yeah.
It should definitely be in the conversation for modern slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
And Quiet Place is kind of folk horror as well because it's people living isolated. It's a dark force sort of out there that's not defined, that no one really understands, and the people in it don't really have the tools to deal with it in the beginning. We catch up with them at a time when they have finally figured out how to sort of, protect themselves against it to a certain degree. But I would definitely pair the two, be a good kind of double feature.
It is a slow burn, but I also think similarly, right away in the first act, they kind of establish like the stakes, right? Because in A Quiet Place, I don't want to spoil it totally for you, Hayes, because I really want you to see it, but there are stakes built up in the first act of A Quiet Place that let you know that that threat is real. It is not unimagined. It is not based on some sort of... it's not like chemical warfare, right? There is an outside force coming in that is actively terrorizing everyone, and then in particular the family in A Quiet Place. And so I think that the fact that there is a slow burn, but they really waste no time with setting up the stakes of the worlds that we're in, I think is a really... I love that. I love it when we just kind of are establishing right away, like, okay, you gotta just be in it now and accept that this is the bounds of this world. We are clearly defining this for you. And the slow burn comes in outlining, right, and defining in more clear detail all of this and kind of filling it out. But they really right away were like, boom on both of them. And I really, I just, I love, if people haven't seen The Quiet Place, Mary obviously has, shout out to you, Mary. Go see it. Hayes, when you get off of this, rent it and watch it.
It was honestly on, I was about to click on it the other night.
I had
yeah.
the fortune of seeing it in a theater, which I truly thought was like the best experience, but also made me hate every person that ever ate a piece of popcorn because I was like,
so true.
You're too loud. They're just living their lives. But I went, I think like midday, because that's my favorite time to see a film. So there was only 3 of us in the theater, but those girls were eating way too loud.
Shut up and back.
I was like, stop breathing. What are you doing? Just shush. So as quiet of a space as you can create for yourself, I would definitely do it. But I like that question, Mary. That's a really good question, because that's such a modern film in terms of time period, but I do see a lot of parallels.
I think also in regards to the like dark and ominous force, it's interesting that A Quiet Place is, don't make a noise to invite this evil entity in. And even though I believe, you do see it in A Quiet Place. You do see like what the monster is. And I guess we see the witch, but it feels like in the witch, it's more of this force that's just kind of all around. Like it does come in the form of like Black Phillip or the witch, the young witch that we see in the old witch too. But it feels more atmospheric, you know what I mean? So it's interesting that A Quiet Place is be quiet to not invite it in. And with the witch, it's almost like don't go out of the house because it'll invite it in, but then inevitably, spoiler alert, comes
also,
in.
Don't hate women or you'll invite it in.
Yeah, that's
like a huge one.
It's like one of the biggest things that I took away from this movie.
Oh, good. I'm glad it wasn't just a female perspective, because I was like, no, they hate her, right? Like,
yeah, if dudes aren't picking up on that in this film, then you have some work to do on yourself. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anyway,
there's one guy out there watching right now that's like, it was Thomason's fault.
Yeah, well,
it's inevitable.
Cool.
Well, let's kind of get into the feminist argument with The Witch, because there are conflicting perspectives on that. Is it a feminist film or is it not? Is it reinforcing stereotypes or just kind of retelling a story that's of what women had to face back in the day? What do you guys think? Caleb, do you think it's a feminist film?
Sure. I mean, I while I don't see the ending as necessarily a happy ending, I can see how some people would view it that way. And I mean, there are happy aspects to it. She is certainly, not that she pursued it, but she's certainly thrown off the shackles of her oppressive society and her oppressive family and the restrictions of her religious beliefs. And she's, we leave her as she's about to live very deliciously, which could be good. Maybe she is going too far in that direction. I don't know if a full-blown attachment to Satan is necessarily the way that you need to go, but in 1630, maybe it is. Maybe there's another option.
The thing that I say is, where else did she have to go? You know,
she's
like
literally got nothing left.
I would agree with that.
Like not just her family. Like she can't go back to the village either. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Well, the horse is gone. Like they're really so.
She will not survive unless she does this thing.
So I guess I would. I'm gonna be surprised. The opposition here. I don't know if I would classify it as a feminist film because of that. Right. The idea of feminism is that that men and women and gender nonconforming individuals would be equal. Right. And so at this time period, if it were to present itself as a fully feminist ideological film to me, it would mean that Thomason would have had equal opportunity to that of her male counterparts in her family, and she doesn't. And so the choice at the end to sign her name in the book, aside from, again, historically and lore, I'm trying to think of the right word, typically when we see representations of witches in particular, they're almost always exclusively female because of the idea that women are more susceptible, right? So the last two people alive in the film are Thomasin and her mother. I think that there's probably something to be said about the fact that maybe they also wanted to recruit Thomasin's mother as well. But then she ended up killing her out of self-defense. And so not only was everything taken from her, but she's driven to this point of probably near, if not full madness, right? Because her whole family's gone. You know, they all blamed her for this. She's probably taking on this enormous mental and emotional burden, and then feels as if her only out is, again, a mirror of women at the time having to either survive through marriage or some sort of, work, like, Thomasin was going to be maybe sold to another family, right? The idea of self-sufficiency for women at that time was almost impossible. So I don't feel as though her liberation at the end was anything more than a resignation to, well, this is my life now. I better enjoy the fact that I can fly, because like that's probably like the only bonus that I have right now, right? Because we also know that part of that eventually down the line will be them having to kill more people, more babies to retain their youth and power of flight and, hot bods. I'm not afraid to say it. So I almost I get what you're saying, and I think that all of the points that you make, Caleb, are 100% valid. I just don't know if I would classify it as being feminist if the idea of feminism that we would be reconciling is an equal opportunity, regardless of gender.
Yeah, so maybe what you're saying is like there are themes of female empowerment toward the end, but it is not exactly feminist.
Yes,
and it's okay.
Exactly.
Like,
It's not like
I'm
she
reducing
takes
it for my
power.
dumb brain.
I mean, but
Yeah.
again, that's my take on it. Also, as a female identified person viewing
Yeah.
it, right? So I think also contextually, I'm just like historically been very obsessed with any sort of tales with witches. I don't know if anybody watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix, but
Yes.
it's very good, and it kind of goes down some weird rabbit holes, but a huge part of that story is this idea that it's the dichotomy, it's the juxtaposition of her choosing that life and then being thrust into that life. And so she has to decide, am I going to sign the book? For those who haven't seen it, she's half mortal, half witch. The expectation is that she would sign Satan's book and become a full witch and but in that you give up your free will in exchange for immortality, and you sort of at any point have to kind of do the Dark Lord's bidding, right? So there is a huge cost to that, but then it's the reconciliation of, right, but what does this immortality get me in terms of free will and being able to act upon it? And so I just love this. There's always like a juxtaposition, and there's always sort of a reconciliation between those two ideas when we're talking about witches in particular. And so I just love it. I just want to go watch Hocus Pocus now, because it's like a lighter version of this. But well, they also die in a like walk-in oven, so it's really not like a good ending for them either. So but yeah, I think there's always going to be that tension when we're talking about women and witchcraft, right? Because it's that juxtaposition and that marrying of free will versus a forcing.
Well, and I think that's exactly it, and that's kind of how I feel about this movie, is the question of, is it a free will choice at the end? And the answer is no. And the other layer to that is, it's not even a sort of feminist option too, because she has to succumb to, one way or another, a patriarchal structure of either the Puritan lifestyle or Satan, who is, presumably a man, unless you listen to Twin Temples with the song "Satan is a Woman." So, yeah, I would argue that it's not a feminist film. It just features a female lead. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm with Virginia on that I'm going to say no, not a feminist film.
Well, it's a good point too. That, like you said, her being broken down and resigned to her fate at the end of this film. I'm sure there are plenty of women in their village, in their church, that are basically facing the same circumstances and inability to change those circumstances. It's just that they're living a very restrictive life.
Undeliciously.
Yeah,
Living
exactly.
undeliciously, yeah. They're not eating butter. They don't know the taste of butter.
What a
They
terrible
don't get to wear a
life.
pretty dress.
Oh man.
Well, let's shift over to talking about A24 horror films, which we've mentioned a couple of times. And again, The Witch is produced by that wonderful production company, A24, along with The Lighthouse. And for those of you familiar with Ari Aster's films, Hereditary and Midsommar, wonderful modern horror films. So Caleb had a note here, kind of a question about the this new wave of A24 horror films. Is it a harmless evolution of the genre, or is it 21st century grief porn?
That's as long as we're coining terms. I just coined that term.
All right,
Grief
so
porn, I like that
copyright
one.
on grief porn for Caleb. Great. What do you guys
Well-
think? Well, Caleb, why don't you start it off? This is your
I think
question.
I think I see those three films, and yes, the three films are only by two directors, but I feel this, especially when I watched, Hereditary and Midsommar. Maybe it's just an Ari Aster thing, but the levels of grief in those films are so great that they almost take me out of them to a distracting degree, because I'm like, I'm still watching a movie here. Like, I don't need to think about this girl's whole family dying in such a horrific way, or this child being killed in the weirdest, worst bummer of a total accident that you've ever even thought of. And I just I guess I'm wary of it because I don't know what's next. It's like, okay, so we have this much horror in our film, now we have this much, now there's you think you've seen grief, now here's twice as much grief, and it's like, where's the tipping point? Like, at a certain point you can't go any further, and I don't think that's the fault of either of these
I don't
directors or
know.
anything, but in real life, yes.
Oh, I was gonna say Hereditary. It did go weirder with like the way that.
Oh,
Spoiler,
don't
hold
make
on,
me
wait,
say
let
that.
me-
sorry.
hold on.
Alert.
There might be
Technically-
spoils. If you haven't seen Hereditary or Midsommar, get out of
Yeah.
here.
Well,
the little girl survives the whole time, and she's the villain of the film, just like the
I think I was texting Sarah as I was watching that movie, and I was just like, I just sent her a text that was no. And
Said,
she knew
I know where
exactly-
you are.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh man.
Well, I think what you're kind of getting at there, of like with this grief porn and how heavy of the film it is, and where's kind of the breaking point of when we're going to shift away from that. I think we could even look to other aspects of the history of horror, right? So when we hit around the era of the Vietnam War is when slasher films come out, because we are starting to experience televised combat. So there's no longer this filter of like, all right, there you go, soldiers, go do your thing and come back and you're totally fine, and PTSD is not a thing.
And we
It's just
don't have
called shell-shocked.
pantyhose.
Yeah, right. But then we televise the combat, and the result, the ripple effect that we see in media, is that slasher films come to be, and that our films are much more violent. But then what's the next wave of that is when we're getting around the 2000s and we're facing the war in Iraq. And, in the media, we're hearing about the torture that's going on, and, the internet just has to provide us with those films that we really don't need to see, that were at one point solely on rotten.com. Please don't look up that website.
Weird. I just thought of Rotten.com the other day. For the
Oh,
first time.
gross.
No, I was talking about that in 4chan
So
with
weird.
someone.
Oh,
like,
no,
anyway.
no. Yeah. But yeah, so, with the dawn of the internet and, media and communication being way faster to be able to communicate to people than it was back when the Vietnam War was going on. Yeah, now you get to see actual, snuff films, really, So then the wave of horror that we see as a result of that was gore porn. So if you think of Saw and Hostel and some of those really disgusting films that just hold on the graphic aspect of the movie arguably too long. I gotta say, my favorite part of horror films is the essence of like what's off screen and
Same.
the horror of the unknown. And I like to not see the monster so I can envision how terrible and scary it is. Like, I feel like the Babadook was one that I was like, man, why'd you have to show it to me? I mean, okay, cool, but I don't know, it could have been a lot scarier if I didn't see it. So anyway, getting to this concept of grief porn being like a new wave of a subgenre of horror, I think that we saw the first wave of it with Lars von Trier, with Danish filmmaking. And he did the Depression trilogy, which was, I think in order, it was Antichrist, Melancholia, and then Nymphomaniac. Technically not a trilogy because it's Nymphomaniac Part 1 and 2. Yeah. What's the term for it? Quadrilogy? I don't know. Maybe. I'll coin that term. So that, I mean, those films, there are some aspects that are pretty shocking, especially in Antichrist, and we won't get into the details of them. But if you compare that and consider that to be like parallel to slasher films of the 70s and 80s, and then parallel it to what we're seeing with grief porn here and what we saw of gore porn around the 2000s, you see that it's just like these kind of shifts in it. So I don't know, have we seen an uptick beyond gore porn that got even more horrific?
AKA torture porn.
Yeah, torture
Yeah.
porn.
Okay.
I mean, I think one could argue that just the resignation to the horror of everyday life is terrifying, right? Because I think that there's something about, at least for me, when I watch like slasher films and stuff, there's always this element of like, well, I don't go camping, so I don't have to worry about that. Like, I would never visit Crystal Lake. You know, there's a bit of a separation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when we, like, this is just because I will never forget it. I once had an tell me that I reminded him of Kristen Dunst in Melancholia, and I've never been able to get that out of my head ever since then. I've just never been, and I would rewatch it and be like, well, am I? Oh, okay. But to that end, with that film in particular, she has such a high level of anxiety and depression throughout the entire film that when the end of the world is actually coming, she's the only one that is like, oh, right, I've been preparing for this emotionally for my whole life. And she's the one that is able to be present with her nephew and make believe in the tent and basically keep the status quo for him seconds before the entire planet is consumed. So there's something to me, I think, about the resignation of reality, right? Whatever that is, even in Antichrist, with it being so removed from what we would know as reality, for that couple, it is their shared despair that ends up manifesting these realities. Similarly with this film, I think that there's such a resignation to the desperation of their real lives that for me is like, oh, but maybe I am Kirsten Dunst in Melancholia, because you have these moments where the parallels, I think, to our modern life that have maybe made self-awareness more available to us in response to the prevalence of technology, but also I think in response to the acceptance of therapy culture, right? I think more than any previous generation now don't necessarily think of therapy as a symbol of weakness, but it is rather a tool that helps us deal with reality. And so now, as we're talking about, 2020 being the year of starkness just fully being presented in our face and us having to adapt in so many ways, and then probably those ripple effects of what this year has done to our collective psyche, aren't going to be known for a while because we're still in the middle of it. There's this global grief and trauma that is almost dwarfing any individual grief or trauma. And I think that that's the scariest thing to me. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, Black Phillip talking at the end was kind of creepy and stuff, but really it was like that realism to me that is so terrifying because it contextualizes it in a way that's like, oh, I've visited barns. I've been there. There's a whole herd of. I live in rural Florida now. There's a whole herd of cows that lives at the end of like the entrance to my apartment complex. Who's to say one of them isn't the devil? I don't know, because this film felt so real that like that baby calf could just be, Brown Phillip. I don't know, So that's really like, for me, it's that ever present possible reality that I just am like, oh no, this is too. I need to be in space or something. I need there to be a separation from what my real life is or could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a disturbing comment on where we are if the last 5 years have seen those 3 films that I classify as grief porn, especially if a lot of the ways that people interact with horror films is to provide a catharsis of their own pain or loss or confusion, then if these 3 films are really a reflection of what we're going through, it just means like things have gotten worse. I mean, I don't think anybody would really disagree with that too
Broadly
much on either side of the aisle. Yeah. So I do think it is a pretty accurate representation of maybe what we need right now, even if that's a terrible realization to have.
I think you're spot on there of, with horror being a way for people to kind of experience somebody surviving something. And, if you think like classic horror slasher stuff, it's not really real. You're not necessarily being chased by a guy in a mask and, that sort of thing. But you're watching this person survive a horrific situation, and you can breathe with them at the end, hopefully, that, they survive, unless they kind of do the cliffhanger of, oh, no, the bad guy's
Till
back.
the arm comes back out.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Right. But watching horror films, for a lot of people, even though they don't realize it, I think a lot of people who have a great amount of anxiety or fears, whether it's, a fear of dying or something like that, tend to lean towards horror films for that release and that catharsis. And I think what we're getting at with this grief porn, as it were, is a catharsis for the general anxiety of the world. So yeah, it's disheartening to think that this film came out in 2015. Ari Aster's stuff, Midsummer was that 2019 or 2018? I forget. So we didn't even get to 2020 yet. So I am a little scared to see what either of them come up with, when we're allowed to start filming stuff again. It's a little terrifying.
It's just going to be a documentary about the Trump presidency, and we're all going to be like, oh, no.
Too soon.
I know, we're still in it. I'm just trying to have coping mechanisms. The debate's later tonight, so I'm just like,
yeah.
Great.
Sorry, too real, guys. My bad.
All good. Well, I think we've kind of covered a lot of ground here, and why don't we kind of wrap it up with just some recommendations on what you guys think our lovely viewers or listeners should read or watch or listen to next. Hayes, you want to go first?
Oh man, honestly, I don't know if I have any specific recommendations right off the top of my head. Look up the term zeitgeist if you don't know that term out there, because that's what we've been talking about the entire night, right? You know what I mean? I would definitely keep that in mind. I had my list up here a minute ago, but yeah, you guys are going to have better recommendations than me with where this has gone. I should say again, watch that YouTube video on the apprehension engine. That's probably one of the most fascinating things. They talk with the luthier, Tony Duggan Smith, that made the instrument, and kind of his process for how and why he chose some of the specific things to include in the instrument, to kind of give Corvin the palette that he was, trying to describe that he wanted for the film. That's my one recommendation.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, if you want to dive deeper into, I guess, sort of the psychology of how sound and scores can really impact your experience of a film, look up the term infrasound, INFRASOUND. Look that up, which talks about a frequency that we can't hear, in that, like, we don't recognize we're hearing it, but it does still effect, like it comes in the same as a regular sound, but you just don't hear a note or something like that, and how it can kind of reverberate within your brain, and hearing that.
Is that like how sometimes you can hear that the TV is on even if it's on mute?
That would be a higher frequency.
Oh, okay.
But this infrasound is the frequency of like an avalanche, or I think there's some animals that use it that we humans can't hear it. It's a super low frequency.
Some people like talk about like the brown note and all these kinds of things.
Yes, the brown note.
Yeah.
So horror films will put it in because, with theatrical surround sound, the speakers can still put out that frequency.
Yeah.
And so what it does when you're in this fully immersive experience is it like reverberates in your chest, and psychologically it causes this really unsettling feeling. So look into that. I didn't look to see if The Witch had infrasound in it, but I know it was a hot trend post 2000. So yeah, if you want to go down that like nerdy musical road, check that out. Virginia, what you got for recommendations for us?
It's a recommendation / a shameless plug because I just got to interview a really fantastic filmmaker named Josh Rubin. I host a podcast called Super Hungry Conversations with Not So Starving Artists. And Josh started on College Humor. So he is a really funny impressionist, but also does really great things with sound. And so he has a film out on Shudder right now called Scare Me. It premiered at Sundance this year and was really well received. It's like certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. I would classify it as a horror comedy, but the use of sound in terms of creating sort of an element of magical realism to the film is phenomenal. The acting's amazing. Aya Cash is in it. She's on The Boys on Amazon. And then Chris Redd from Saturday Night Live is also in it. So in terms of just like pinnacle to me of what independent like cinema and filmmaking can do, please watch it. It's called Scare Me by Josh Rubin. Just check that out. Shudder, you can do like a free 7-day trial if you're looking for some real spooky stuff for the holiday. And if you're interested, I've done an interview with him that you can find on YouTube and IG Live. So it was a really good time. We got to talk about a white fragility. So,
we should be talking about that more.
Yeah, honestly, but truly, I cannot recommend that film enough. Scare Me on Shudder. Funny, suspenseful, magical realism, sound design, acting, everything for me was tops. I have seen it twice already, and it'll be on like VOD, and I'm gonna buy it. Like, it's just one of those that I'm like, I want to be able to go and kind of rewatch because it was just such a good time. And I think I mentioned before when we were talking at the last Screen Club, I've also been watching just a lot of old Star Trek because it's nice to feel soothed by Captain Picard and to think that he could be a real person. Also, that works for President Bartlett and the West Wing. So if you're looking for something not spooky that'll just be a balm to your soul, I've just been rewatching those.
Awesome. All right, Caleb, what you got?
What do you mean Picard could be a real person?
I mean, he really lives in our hearts. He does really live in our hearts, for sure.
Right. Well, during this recent rewatch, I got really interested in two things. One is like I said, the folk horror genre that started in the late 60s and early 70s in Britain. And there's a great book called Folk Horror, Hours Dreadful and Things Strange by Adam Scoville that you can get at the Grand Rapids Public Library. That's a really good read, and it's good if you've seen a few of the Touchstone films from that era, if you've seen The Wicker Man, but you want more of that feeling, if you want more of that kind of time period, that kind of witchy vibe. And then I also got really interested in thinking about this time period, the 17th century, and the English settlers that came over here. And there's an amazing book that I just started reading. It's called Seasons of Misery, Catastrophe and Colonial Settlement in Early America by Kathleen Donegan. And that just goes into some horrific things that you can't even believe people were living through at that time. And if you like that sort of thing, which golly, I do.
More grief porn, per se?
Yeah, well, at least it's reality porn is the problem.
Reality grief porn.
Yeah, I have 17,000 movie recommendations, so I won't really do that too much, but I know people like newer stuff. So The Ritual is a newer folk horror, came out in the last few years. It was on Netflix, might still be. That's pretty similar in some ways to this. It's a real classic folk horror sort of setup and payoff. The other movie that none of the plot of this film reminded me of, but sort of just the weird slow burn dread, but I don't know, similar toned, was the film Let the Right One In. I don't know if you guys saw that. I love that film. I really love it. I've seen it several times, and for some reason during this rewatch of The Witch, some of the same vibes were there, and I would really recommend people check that one out. There's one other one which is called A Dark Song from, I think, 2016, and I don't know anything that the director has done otherwise, but similar sort of grief porn, I hate to say, but goes in a really interesting religious direction near the end, and kind of subverts a lot of the same expectations like The Witch did for me too. So I'd recommend that one.
Awesome. And we've already talked about all the movies that I would probably recommend watching after this, like Lars von Trier stuff. Even go way back with his stuff too, with the Dogma 95 movement. But definitely Hereditary and Midsommar, if you were jamming on The Witch, check those out. They're not for the faint of heart, but they're very interesting. And then The Lighthouse, which I think that's Hayes' homework, right? You have to watch that film.
That is definitely my homework. I'm probably going to do that either tonight or tomorrow.
I love that movie so much. As far as books, when I was watching this, it kind of reminded me of House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, with kind of the atmospheric part of it. And that book is just very creative with how they use the text on page. And I won't get into that too much, but I'm in the middle of another book called The House in the Dark of the Woods, which is very, very similar to The Witch and like same kind of time period. It's spooky. I don't know what's going to happen, so we'll see. But so far, it's good. So hopefully you want to check that out.
Almost recommend it.
Yeah, so far, I'll recommend. Halfway through, it's good. Well, a couple other things before we wrap up here. If you are enjoying this, if you have enjoyed Screen Club and all that good stuff, and again, normally we do this in person in the Micro Cinema here at the beautiful Wealthy Theater, and now we're doing it virtually for the time being to be safe. But if you enjoy it, support more programs like Cinema Lab and Screen Club and donate to Wealthy Theater. We strive to offer media literacy programming for the public, and in this case free, and Screen Club and Cinema Lab are usually free too. And that's part of the organization that we are part of, which is the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, which has a bunch of awesome departments. So check out grcmc.org, or again, go to wealthytheater.org/donate. If you have recommendations on movies or shows that you want us to talk about, hit us up. Facebook, I think, is kind of the best place to go for that. Let me pull that up here. Facebook, or this is the same handle for Instagram too, if you want to message us and say, hey, I love this movie. Let's get nerdy. We are all definitely into that. And then lastly, the next thing we have coming up that I know Caleb's very excited for is Screen Club. We're going to be talking about the OG Twilight Zone on November 9th.
It's only my favorite show of all time.
Only, yes. And lucky you guys, Caleb is going to be providing us with a must-see episode guide.
Yes.
So you don't necessarily have to binge the entire series, but he's going to give you some that you really should check out and some that we'll probably be focusing on. So keep an eye out for that. I think we're going to be posting that up on Facebook. All right, guys, it's been real. Anything else you want to mention before we hop out of here?
Just one final plug for Kanopy. If people are wanting to watch this film, and
Yeah,
any others, I think it's the only place that The Witch is streaming right now for free.
I think you're
if you
right.
have access
Yeah.
to the library.
And
so-
most of these other movies that Sarah mentioned too, I think I watched like
Yeah.
Midsummer and all of those other ones on Kanopy. So like,
Yep.
do it, people.
Huge
It's better than
A24,
Netflix.
collection. Yeah.
As well as we did a special event, Sarah and I, for a documentary called Streetlight Harmonies, which is not horror related at all, but really focuses on doo-wop music. And that is also available on Kanopy for free as of like a few weeks ago. So really, it like support your libraries. Like,
Yeah.
just support your library. Like it is more than just books. Even if you don't like books, they got other stuff. There's probably people that are like, I don't like books, but there's so much, and it just support like your local librarians. I don't know. And Kanopy is such a good resource for that.
So good.
Definitely.
And free. Like,
And free.
it's right after my Dutch heart, dude. I love free.
I love it.
All right, cool. Well, Caleb, Hayes, Virginia, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this movie and to get real nerdy. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation we have. So until then, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Peace out, y'all.